Hi, my name is Florence Hamilton, also known as AUNTY FLO. That's AUNTY FLO. I was born February 2nd, 1951, on a cold, windy night in a town called Tutwiler in Tallahassee County, Mississippi, which is referred to as the Delta area. And that is because of all the flat land with all the beautiful green trees and grass off in the distance as far as your eyes can see. I have 7 siblings: Charlene, Carl, Velma, Robert, Geneva, Gloria, and LaFonso. My older sister and brother were 10 to 12 years older than the younger 6 siblings, starting with Velma down to LaFonso, which includes me, and they were not raised with us. Well, when we were kids living in a 3 bedroom house, and needless to say, a family of 8, that would be considered a small house, and we were pretty cramped for space. In fact, most of the kids slept in the same bedroom in 3 beds. As we laid in bed at night with the lights off and the moon light shining through, and we could see the little town of Tutwiler off in a distance with its lights shining bright. I would always make up short, fictitious stories to tell my siblings before we went to sleep. Well, I have included 4 short stories in this book, and I will do all my future books the same way. There will be 4 stories per book, and I will read one story to you on my YouTube channel every Monday morning between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. The very first story that I'm going to read to you is called The 2x10 Liquor Store Robberies. And the second one is going to be Just One Baby with No Specification. The third one is called Black Sheep, Unfair Treatment Within Siblings. And the fourth one is Never Look Back at What You Left Behind. Okay, so let's get started with the first one, which is the 2x10 liquor store robberies. Now, keeping in mind, this is a fictitious short story. The main characters are a Chinese family who used American first names, with a father named Harry Chen, the mother is named Amy Chen, and the son is named Johnny Chen. They have one son. And Mr. and Mrs. Chen owned a single liquor store in Koreatown of Los Angeles, California. They purchased this store with money they brought with them approximately 20 years ago in 1997 from China. Mr. and Mrs. Chen had done remarkably well in the last 20 years, and by now, Johnny was enrolled in Harvard University, and he planned to go to medical school back east as well after he graduates. All the while, even though they had done well financially, they still lived above their liquor store. Then one winter day in November 2008, a robber came in and robbed their store. Mrs. Chen became hysterical and ran, and the robber shot her, and as she was running away, and she ended up in a wheelchair. And even though the doctors kept insisting that if she would put forth the effort in physical therapy, she could walk again. She instead chose to sit in the wheelchair upstairs in their house and look out the window and just wait patiently for her husband to come home late at night from downstairs in their liquor store. In the meantime, Mr. Chen was constantly walking around, holding in so much anger at what these robbers had done to his wife, until one day it dawned on him how he could relieve himself of some of this anger. And by the way, the robbers were never caught. He decided to build a drop down that he considered a pit of hell right in front of the cash register, and it would be about 2 feet long and 10 feet wide, with a release button on the side of the register. They also changed the name of the liquor store to the 2x10 liquor store. Now, this 2x10 could drop at least 3 people at a time. Mr. Chin went to Lowe's as he bought especially strong wood planks and different types of latches and wiring. Since he had been an electrician back in his country, he didn't ask anyone to help him. He started working long hours after he closed the liquor store at 12 a.m. Only on the days Monday through Thursday, though. And he had to make sure he was precise in order not to harm anyone that is not a robber. He had to be precise in how he cut the space in order not to harm anybody who was not a robber. There was carpet in the area, and that part covered the 2x10 boards, was cut precisely to fit, but from the naked eye you could not detect this. The wires were connected to the levels underneath the 2x10 space, and they were connected to the red button on the side of the cash register. And just to avoid an accidental push, the button was covered with hard but bendable plastic, and only Mr. Chin knew it was there. And plus, he was the only one who worked the cash register because they had no other employees. Well, Mr. Chin took 2 years to complete his contraption, and that was filled with some type of acid that completely takes the meat off a person, leaving only the skeletal remains. And wouldn't you know it, a robber comes in on November 16, 2010, and looks around for only a minute and made sure the store was empty, and then he walks over to the counter and pulls a gun on Mr. Chin and says, "Give me the money." Mr. Chin throws up his hands and says, "Okay, okay." And he walks to the register while watching the would-be robber as he comes down to the 2x10 space. And as soon as Mr. Chin saw that, he pressed the red button, and the robber went down so fast his gun flew out of his hand and was left on the floor. Mr. Chin presses the button to close the 2x10 space and run around the corner and picks up the gun and put behind counter. Immediately after he closes the store at 12 a.m., he dims the light, removes the cameras, and reopens the 2x10 space and drops the camera and the gun in with the would-be robber. He could see the robber looking up with his eyes open but lifeless. Mr. Chin waves bye-bye to the man and lets out a very weird laugh, and then goes back and closes the 2x10 opening. There was a missing person report found and a picture of the man on television. Nobody suspected the liquor store because not one of his friends knew he was going to rob the liquor store, even though he had previously served time for a robbery of some sort in the past. Mr. Chin learned that the man's name was Chi-Ching, age 22. 6 months to the date later, on May 16, 2011, another man attempted to rob Mr. Chin, and he was successfully dropped in the 2x10 space. And he later found out this man's name was Juan Castellano, age 25. But since he had told his family that he was going to the liquor store just before he was reported missing, the investigators did go to the 2x10 liquor store and asked Mr. Chin if he saw the man in the prior 3 days and showed him a picture. Mr. Chin took a long look and says no. Mr. Chin had already dropped the film from the camera in the 2x10 space, and when the investigator had asked they could review the film for the last 3 days, Mr. Chin gladly allowed it and informed them that the tape had been recorded over and there was nothing there. Mr. Chin felt just satisfied and justified every time he looked at his wife in the wheelchair. He would smile from ear to ear as he retired to his bed. Then everything was going really smoothly until one day, 1 year later, in 2012, there were 2 guys that came in the liquor store. And to Mr. Chin, they looked and acted suspicious to him, but nevertheless, he spoke to them as one of them brought a 6-pack of beer to the counter, and the other one asked for a pack of cigarettes. Just as Mr. Chin was ringing up these items, which would probably be the last sale of the night because it was Thursday night at 11:55 p.m., the guy on his left pulled out a gun, and they both leaned over the counter and told him give them all the money he had. Mr. Chin threw up his hands and said, okay, and immediately went to the cash register and pushed the 2x10 space button, and down they went into the pit. Mr. Chen rushed to the front door, locked it because he could hear these guys still yelling from the pit. He then went behind counter and pressed button and closed the 2x10 pit. Just as he did that, there was a third guy banging on the door, and it turns out he was the lookout guy. Mr. Chen pulled out his gun and went towards the doors and closed the inside iron bars. The guy outside got in a car and drove away extremely fast. Mr. Chen dimmed the lights, made sure none of the belongings were left out, and also made sure the carpet was leveled out so not to indicate any cuts in it. After Mr. Chen secured his place and went upstairs to his living quarters, and about an hour later, there was a loud knock on the front door of the liquor store. He looked out the window and sees all of these police and police cars with red lights flashing. He puts on his robe and goes down and opens the door, and the police comes in, and they said there were some mothers and family members out front saying their sons had gone into the liquor store about an hour ago and never came out. The lookout guy was there and was telling the police that he brought his friends to the store and they never came back out, but he failed to tell the police that he brought them there to rob the store. The police questioned Mr. Chen and looked around, and then one of them pointed at the camera, and that's when Mr. Chen remembered that he had not removed the current film from the camera. He refused to give up the camera, which made the detectives very suspicious, and they stayed until they got a court order from a judge around 2 a.m. They took the camera back to the office, and they took a look, and they were just horrified at what they saw. They called the police back that had stayed at the store and advised them of the findings and ordered them to arrest Mr. Chen and take a look in the 2x10 space hole in which he took some time to figure out how to open because Mr. Chen refused to tell them. They went upstairs and talked with his wife and was convinced that she knew nothing about these murders. Once the 2x10 space was opened, there was such a stench that the hazmat team was called to the scene. Mr. Chen immediately called their son, who was away at school, and he flew back the next day. He took his mother to see his father the next day in jail, and there was no bail set due to they thought Mr. Chen would be a flight risk. They saw Mr. Chen behind a glass window, and he explained why he did it, and he cried, stood up, and walked away. The forensic team was also called out to the crime scene, and they removed all the skeletal remains and did DNA tests and identified all four of the would-be robbers as Chi Ching, Juan Castellano, Josh Turner, and his best friend Tyrone Brown. However, since Mr. Chen destroyed tapes of the first two robbers, but it was confirmed that the last two guys were robbing him, he was still given life in prison, and that the 2x10 liquor store was demolished, but has never been forgotten by this neighborhood. Lesson learned here. No matter how unjust you think the criminal justice system is, you cannot take the law into your own hands. The end. Be sure to join me next Monday morning for my next story, which again is Just One Baby, No Specifications. Bye for now. This is AUNTY FLO signing off. Bye.